Marcus Chen had always been invisible, and that was exactly how he liked it. At 38 years old, he had perfected the art of being the kind of employee that everyone trusted but no one really noticed. As the senior financial controller at NexTech Solutions, one of Silicon Valley's fastest-growing cybersecurity companies, Marcus was the man who made sure the numbers added up, the taxes were filed on time, and the financial reports were pristine. NexTech Solutions was a $2.8 billion company that had grown from a garage startup to a major player in the cybersecurity industry in just 8 years. Founded by brilliant but chaotic entrepreneurs Jake Morrison and Sarah Kim, the company had attracted massive venture capital investments and had recently gone public with one of the most successful IPOs in tech history. The company's rapid growth had created exactly the kind of environment that Marcus had been waiting for his entire career, a place where millions of dollars moved through dozens of accounts daily, where the pace of business was so fast that detailed oversight was often sacrificed for speed, and where a trusted financial controller could operate with minimal supervision. Marcus had joined NexTech 3 years earlier, coming from a prestigious accounting firm where he had built a reputation as a meticulous, reliable professional who never made mistakes. His references were impeccable, his credentials were outstanding, and his personality was perfectly forgettable. He was the kind of person who blended into the background at company meetings, who never caused drama or drew attention to himself, and who could be counted on to handle the boring but essential work that kept the company running. What no one at NexTech knew was that Marcus Chen was not his real name. He had been born Marcus Kowalski in Detroit, the son of a factory worker, who had lost his job when the auto industry collapsed. Marcus had watched his family lose their home, their savings, and their dignity, all while the wealthy executives who had caused the crisis walked away with golden parachutes worth millions. That experience had shaped Marcus's worldview in fundamental ways. He had learned that the system was rigged in favor of the wealthy and powerful, and that people like his father, honest, hard-working people, were disposable. He had also learned that if you wanted to survive and thrive in that system, you had to be smarter, more ruthless, and more careful than everyone else. Marcus had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. He had earned degrees in accounting and computer science, had worked at top-tier firms to build his reputation, and had carefully studied the financial systems of dozens of companies, looking for weaknesses and opportunities. He had changed his name legally, created a new identity, and built a perfect professional persona that would allow him to operate undetected. The plan he had developed was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than stealing large amounts of money, all at once, which would trigger immediate attention, Marcus would siphon small amounts from dozens of different accounts over an extended period. The amounts would be small enough to avoid detection by automated systems, but large enough to add up to a substantial sum over time. NexTech's financial structure was perfect for this kind of operation. The company had over 200 different accounts spread across multiple banks, including operational accounts, investment accounts, escrow accounts for client funds, and various subsidiary accounts. Money flowed between these accounts constantly as the company paid vendors, collected payments from clients, invested surplus funds, and managed its complex financial obligations. Marcus's position gave him access to all of these accounts, along with the authority to move money between them as needed for legitimate business purposes. He also had access to the company's financial reporting systems, which meant he could manipulate the records to hide his activities. The key to his plan was a sophisticated understanding of how financial audits worked. Marcus knew that auditors typically focused on large transactions and obvious discrepancies, not on small amounts that could be explained as rounding errors, bank fees, or minor accounting adjustments. He also knew that auditors relied heavily on the internal controls and documentation provided by the company's own financial team, which meant that as long as he could create convincing paperwork, his activities would likely go unnoticed. Marcus began his operation slowly and carefully. In his first month at NexTech, he transferred just $50,000 from a client escrow account to a shell company he had created. The amount was small enough to be explained as a legitimate vendor payment, and he had created all the necessary documentation to support the transaction. Over the following months, Marcus gradually increased the frequency and size of his transfers. He developed a network of shell companies with legitimate-sounding names like Pacific Consulting Services, Digital Solutions Group, and Advanced Systems Integration. Each company had proper business licenses, bank accounts, and even basic websites that made them appear to be real vendors, providing services to NexTech. The beauty of Marcus's system was that it was almost entirely automated. He had written software, programs that would identify optimal times to make transfers, generate the necessary documentation, and update the financial records to hide the transactions. The programs were designed to mimic normal business patterns, making transfers during busy periods when they were less likely to be noticed and varying the amounts. and timing to avoid creating suspicious patterns. By the end of his first year at NexTech, Marcus had successfully stolen $8.2 million without anyone noticing. The money was distributed across dozens of accounts in different countries, invested in legitimate businesses and real estate, and carefully laundered through a complex network of financial transactions that would be nearly impossible to trace. Success was due not just to his technical skills, but to his understanding of human psychology. He had cultivated an image as the perfect employee, someone who worked long hours, never took vacation days, and was always available to handle financial emergencies. His colleagues saw him as dedicated and trustworthy, someone who could be relied upon to handle sensitive financial matters without supervision. "Marcus is the best hire we've ever made," CFO Jennifer Walsh had told the board of directors during his first annual review. "He's incredibly detailed, completely reliable, and has saved us from several potential compliance issues. I don't know what we'd do without him." What Jennifer didn't know was that the compliance issues Marcus had identified and resolved were often problems he had created himself, designed to make him appear indispensable while giving him opportunities to manipulate the financial systems. Marcus also understood the importance of maintaining his cover through seemingly legitimate activities. He lived modestly, driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic and renting a small apartment in a middle-class neighborhood. He had no expensive hobbies, no flashy lifestyle, and no obvious signs of wealth that might raise suspicions. The money he was stealing was being invested in assets that would be difficult to trace back to him: real estate purchased through shell companies, investments in legitimate businesses, and offshore accounts in countries with strong banking privacy laws. Marcus was building a fortune that would eventually allow him to disappear completely. But he was doing it so carefully and gradually that no one would notice until it was far too late. By his second year at NexTech, Marcus had refined his operation to the point where he was stealing approximately $2 million per month. The company's rapid growth meant that small discrepancies in the financial records were easily explained as the natural chaos of a fast-expanding business. When auditors questioned minor irregularities, Marcus was always ready with detailed explanations and supporting documentation that satisfied their concerns. The irony was that Marcus's theft was actually helping NexTech in some ways. The money he was stealing was coming from various accounts that were earning minimal interest, and his careful manipulation of the financial records was making the company's cash flow appear more stable and predictable than it actually was. This improved financial picture was helping NexTech secure better terms on loans and investments, which was contributing to the company's continued growth. As Marcus entered his third year at NexTech, he had successfully stolen over $35 million and was on track to reach his goal of $50 million within the next 6 months. He had also begun preparing for his exit strategy, carefully planned disappearance that would allow him to vanish with his stolen fortune before anyone realized what had happened. But Marcus's greatest challenge was yet to come. NexTech's rapid growth and high-profile status had attracted the attention of federal regulators, who were planning a comprehensive audit of the company's financial practices. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division had also opened a preliminary investigation into several tech companies, including NexTech, as part of a broader crackdown on corporate fraud in Silicon Valley. Marcus knew that a federal investigation would be far more thorough and sophisticated than the routine audits he had been successfully fooling for years. FBI financial investigators had access to advanced analytical tools, could subpoena records from multiple banks simultaneously, and had the authority to freeze assets and arrest suspects without warning. But Marcus also knew that he had advantages that most corporate thieves lacked. His theft had been so carefully planned and executed that there was virtually no evidence of wrongdoing in NexTech's official records. The shell companies he had created were legitimate businesses with real operations and employees. The financial transactions he had conducted all appeared to be normal business activities supported by proper documentation. Most importantly, Marcus had spent 3 years building a reputation as the most trustworthy and competent employee at NexTech. When investigators came looking for evidence of financial fraud, the last person they would suspect would be the dedicated financial controller, who had been working overtime to help them understand the company's complex financial structure. As Marcus sat in his modest office on a Friday evening, reviewing the latest financial reports and planning his next series of transfers, he felt a sense of satisfaction that few people ever experience. He had successfully executed one of the most sophisticated financial frauds in corporate history, and he had done it right under the noses of some of the smartest people in Silicon Valley. In 6 months, Marcus Chen would disappear forever, taking with him $50 million and leaving behind no trace of his true identity or whereabouts. The perfect crime was almost complete. What Marcus didn't know was that his activities had already been detected by an AI-powered fraud detection system that NexTech had quietly installed 3 months earlier. The system had identified subtle patterns in the financial data that suggested systematic theft, and a team of FBI investigators was already building a case against him. The hunter was about to become the hunted, but Marcus Chen was far from finished. His greatest challenge, his most brilliant deception, was yet to come. Special Agent Sarah Martinez, had seen every type of financial fraud imaginable during her 12 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, but the NexTech case was already shaping up to be one of the most sophisticated she had ever encountered. The AI fraud detection system had flagged over 300 suspicious transactions totaling approximately $47 million. But the evidence was so well hidden that it had taken her team 3 weeks just to confirm that a crime had actually been committed. "This isn't your typical corporate embezzlement," Agent Martinez explained to her partner, Agent David Kim, as they reviewed the case files in their San Francisco field office. "Whoever is doing this understands financial systems better than most CFOs. They've created a network of shell companies that look completely legitimate, generated documentation that passes every standard audit procedure, and timed their transactions to coincide with normal business activities." The investigation had begun when NexTech's new AI-powered fraud detection system, ironically, a product developed by the company itself, had identified subtle anomalies in the company's financial data. The system used machine learning algorithms to analyze millions of transactions and identified patterns that might indicate fraudulent activity. What the AI had detected was almost invisible to human analysis. Tiny statistical variations in transaction timing, amounts that were just slightly outside normal ranges, and vendor payments that followed patterns that were mathematically improbable to occur naturally. Individually, none of these anomalies would have raised suspicions, but collectively, they suggested systematic manipulation of the financial system. When NexTech's executives had been briefed on the AI system's findings, their first reaction had been disbelief. The company's financial controls were considered among the best in the industry, and their annual audits had never identified any significant problems. But as they dug deeper into the data, they realized that someone had been systematically stealing from the company for years. "The sophistication level is off the charts," said Dr. Lisa Chen, the data scientist who had designed the fraud detection system. "This person didn't just steal money, they created an entire parallel financial ecosystem that operated alongside the legitimate business. They've got shell companies with real employees, actual business operations, and financial histories that go back years." The FBI had been called in when the scope of the theft became clear. Initial estimates suggested that over $40 million had been stolen, making it one of the largest corporate embezzlement cases in Silicon Valley history. But what made the case truly extraordinary was that the theft was still ongoing. Responsible was continuing to steal money even as the investigation was beginning. Agent Martinez's team had started by analyzing the shell companies that appeared to be receiving the stolen funds. What they found was a masterpiece of financial engineering. Each company had been carefully constructed to appear legitimate, proper business licenses, tax filings, employee records, and even customer testimonials on their websites. Pacific Consulting Services claimed to provide cybersecurity consulting. 2 tech companies, Digital Solutions Group, offered software development services. Advanced Systems Integration specialized in helping companies integrate complex IT systems. All of them had professional websites, listed phone numbers, and even small offices in various cities. But when FBI agents visited these offices, they found something interesting. The companies were real, but they were essentially fronts. Each had 1 or 2 employees who believed they were working for legitimate consulting firms, handling basic administrative tasks and answering phones. The employees had no idea that their companies were being used to launder stolen money. "It's brilliant," Agent Kim admitted grudgingly. By creating actual businesses with real employees, the perpetrator made it almost impossible to prove that these companies are fraudulent. They're providing actual services, filing real tax returns, and maintaining legitimate business operations. The investigation team had also discovered that the stolen money wasn't sitting in bank accounts waiting to be recovered. Instead, it had been systematically invested in a diverse portfolio of assets, real estate in multiple countries, investments in legitimate businesses, precious metals, cryptocurrency, and even art and collectibles. "This person isn't just stealing money," Agent Martinez observed. "They're building a completely new identity and financial foundation. They're planning to disappear permanently, and they're making sure that when they do, their assets will be virtually impossible to trace or recover." The FBI's next step was to analyze NexTech's internal financial systems to identify who had the access and knowledge necessary to execute such a sophisticated fraud. The list of suspects was surprisingly short. Only 5 people had the combination of system access, financial authority, and technical knowledge required to pull off the scheme. At the top of the list was Marcus Chen, the senior financial controller who had joined the company 3 years earlier. Marcus had access to all of NexTech's financial accounts, the authority to approve vendor payments, and the technical skills to manipulate the company's financial reporting systems. But Marcus was also the least likely suspect from a behavioral standpoint. His colleagues described him as the most dedicated and trustworthy employee at the company. He worked longer hours than anyone else, had never taken a vacation, and had actually identified and prevented several potential financial problems during his tenure. "Marcus is the last person I would suspect," CFO Jennifer Walsh told the FBI agents during her interview. He's incredibly honest, almost obsessively careful about following procedures, and has actually saved the company money by identifying inefficiencies and preventing errors. The other suspects included 2 other financial analysts, the IT director who managed the company's financial systems, and Jennifer Walsh herself. But preliminary investigation had ruled out most of them. They either lacked the necessary access or had alibis that made their involvement unlikely. As the investigation focused on Marcus Chen, Agent Martinez began to notice something troubling. Marcus's background was almost too perfect. His employment history showed a steady progression through increasingly responsible positions at prestigious firms. His references were glowing. His educational credentials were impeccable. His financial records showed a modest lifestyle consistent with his salary. But when Agent Martinez dug deeper, she found subtle inconsistencies that suggested Marcus Chen might not be who he claimed to be. His social security number had been issued when he was 23 years old, unusually late for someone born in the United States. His educational records, while legitimate, showed gaps that were difficult to explain. Most tellingly, there were virtually no traces of Marcus Chen's existence before he was 25 years old. "I think we're dealing with someone who has created an entirely new identity," Agent Martinez told her supervisor, Assistant Director Robert Hayes. "Marcus Chen might be a completely fabricated persona, designed specifically to infiltrate NexTech." FBI began a comprehensive background investigation into Marcus Chen's true identity. They analyzed fingerprints, DNA evidence from his office, facial recognition data, and even his writing patterns and speech characteristics. What they discovered was shocking. Marcus Chen was actually Marcus Kowalski, a former accounting student who had disappeared from Detroit 15 years earlier, after being questioned in connection with a financial aid fraud scheme at his university. He's been planning this for over a decade, Agent Martinez realized. He created the Marcus Chen identity, built a perfect professional reputation, and positioned himself to infiltrate a high-value target like Next. This isn't opportunistic theft, it's a long-term strategic operation. But even with this knowledge, the FBI faced a significant challenge. Marcus had been so careful in executing his fraud that there was virtually no direct evidence linking him to the stolen money. The shell companies were legitimate businesses. The financial transactions were supported by proper documentation. The money had been laundered so thoroughly that proving it came from NexTech would be extremely difficult. "We know he did it, but proving it in court is going to be nearly impossible," Agent Kim pointed out during a team meeting. His defense attorney will argue that the AI system is unreliable, that the shell companies are legitimate vendors, and that Marcus was just doing his job by processing vendor payments. Agent Martinez knew that they needed to catch Marcus in the act of stealing money, or find evidence that directly linked him to the shell companies. But Marcus was too smart to make obvious mistakes, and he had been careful to avoid leaving digital fingerprints that could be traced back to him. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lisa Chen, the data scientist who had designed the fraud detection system, had been analyzing the timing patterns of the suspicious transactions. She noticed that the thefts always occurred during specific time windows that corresponded to Marcus's work schedule. "Look at this," she showed Agent Martinez. Every single suspicious transaction happened either during Marcus's regular work hours or during times when he had documented access to the building after hours. There's not a single theft that occurred when Marcus was provably somewhere else. More importantly, Dr. Chen had discovered that the sophisticated software used to execute the fraud had been written using programming techniques and coding styles that were consistent with Marcus's educational background and previous work experience. "The person who wrote this code has specific training in financial systems programming," Dr. Chen explained. "They use coding conventions that are taught at only a few universities, and Marcus's transcripts show that he took advanced courses in exactly these techniques." Armed with this evidence, the FBI was ready to make their move. But Agent Martinez knew that arresting Marcus prematurely could be a mistake. If he suspected that he was under investigation, he might activate his escape plan and disappear with the stolen money before they could recover it. Instead, Agent Martinez decided to set a trap. Working with NexTech's executives, the FBI created a fake financial emergency that would require Marcus to move large amounts of money quickly. If Marcus was the thief, he would likely use this opportunity to steal one final, large amount before disappearing. "We're going to give him enough rope to hang himself," Agent Martinez explained to her team, "and when he takes the bait, we'll be ready to catch him in the act." What Agent Martinez didn't know was that Marcus had already detected signs of the investigation. His own monitoring systems had identified unusual access patterns in NexTech's financial databases, and he had noticed subtle changes in his colleagues' behavior that suggested something was wrong. Marcus Chen was preparing for the most dangerous phase of his operation, the final theft and his permanent disappearance. But he had one more surprise in store for the FBI, a deception so audacious that it would make his previous crimes look simple by comparison. Marcus Chen had always known this day would come. As he sat in his office on a rainy Tuesday morning, reviewing what appeared to be routine financial reports. He was actually analyzing the subtle signs that told him the FBI was closing in, the unusual database access patterns, the slightly different questions from his colleagues. The way CFO Jennifer Walsh had been looking at him during meetings, all of it pointed to one conclusion. His time at NexTech was almost over, but Marcus had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. What the FBI didn't realize was that their investigation had been detected almost from the beginning, and Marcus had been carefully laying the groundwork for his final, most audacious deception. The trap that Agent Martinez had set, the fake financial emergency requiring large money transfers, was exactly the opportunity Marcus had been waiting for. But instead of using it to steal one final amount before disappearing, Marcus was going to use it to execute a plan that would not only allow him to escape with his stolen fortune, but would actually make the FBI complicit in covering up his crimes. The fake emergency involved a supposed cybersecurity breach at one of NexTech's major clients, requiring immediate transfer of $15 million to secure emergency consulting services. The FBI expected Marcus to steal this money and run, giving them the evidence they needed to arrest him and recover the stolen funds. What they didn't expect was that Marcus would actually transfer the money exactly as requested, but to a shell company that he controlled, making the FBI's own sting operation part of his money laundering scheme. The transfer has been completed, Marcus reported to Jennifer Walsh and the assembled executives, including the FBI agents who were posing as cybersecurity consultants. $15 million has been sent to Apex Security Solutions as requested. Apex Security Solutions was one of Marcus's most sophisticated shell companies, created specifically for this moment. Unlike his other fronts, Apex was designed to actually provide the cybersecurity services that NexTech was supposedly purchasing. Marcus had hired real cybersecurity experts, rented office space in 3 cities, and even developed proprietary software that would justify the enormous consulting fees. The beautiful thing about this plan, Marcus thought to himself as he watched the FBI agents congratulate themselves on their successful sting operation, is that they're going to help me prove that Apex is a legitimate company providing real services. Over the following weeks, Apex Security Solutions would actually deliver the cybersecurity services that NexTech had supposedly purchased, making it nearly impossible for prosecutors to argue that the $15 million transfer was fraudulent. The FBI's own sting operation would become evidence that Apex was a legitimate vendor providing valuable services. But Marcus's real masterstroke was yet to come. He had spent months preparing a comprehensive confession that would simultaneously admit to stealing money while making it impossible for the government to prosecute him or recover the stolen funds. 3 days after the Apex transfer, Marcus walked into the FBI's San Francisco field office and asked to speak with Agent Martinez. "I want to confess to embezzling money from NexTech Solutions," he told the stunned agent, "but I also want to make a deal that will benefit everyone involved." Agent Martinez was immediately suspicious. In her experience, sophisticated criminals didn't voluntarily confess unless they had an angle that would benefit them more than staying silent. "I'm listening," she said carefully. Marcus pulled out a thick folder containing detailed financial records, bank statements, and documentation of his entire operation. "I've stolen approximately $47 million from NexTech over the past 3 years," he said calmly. "I can provide you with complete documentation of how I did it, where the money went, and how to prevent similar crimes in the future." "In exchange for what?" Agent Martinez asked. "In exchange for immunity from prosecution and the right to keep $25 million of the stolen money," Marcus replied. "The remaining $22 million will be returned to NexTech, along with interest." Agent Martinez was speechless. She had never heard of a criminal offering to return stolen money in exchange for the right to keep an even larger amount. "You're insane if you think we would agree to that," she said. "Actually, I think you'll find it's the best deal you're going to get," Marcus replied calmly. "Let me explain why." Marcus opened his folder and began laying out documents that showed the true scope of his operation. The $47 million that had been stolen from NexTech was just the beginning. Marcus had used that money to make investments that had generated an additional $78 million in profits. The total value of his criminal enterprise was now over $125 million. "The money I stole has been invested in hundreds of different assets across dozens of countries," Marcus explained. "Real estate, businesses, stocks, bonds, cryptocurrency, precious metals, art, and collectibles. I've spent 3 years building a financial empire that would take your forensic accountants decades to unravel." He pulled out a map showing the global distribution of his assets. Properties in Switzerland, businesses in Singapore, investments in the Cayman Islands, crypto wallets in countries that didn't cooperate with US law enforcement. "If you arrest me and try to prosecute me, I'll fight the charges for years," Marcus continued. "My assets are protected by banking privacy laws, corporate structures, and legal jurisdictions that will make recovery nearly impossible. You'll spend millions of dollars in legal fees and years of investigation, and you'll probably recover less than 10% of the stolen money." Agent Martinez was beginning to understand the diabolical brilliance of Marcus's plan. He had structured his crimes in such a way that traditional law enforcement methods would be largely ineffective. But if you accept my deal, Marcus said, NexTech gets $22 million back immediately, plus interest. That's more money than they'll ever see if you try to prosecute me through the courts. The FBI gets a detailed confession that will help you understand how this type of crime is committed and how to prevent it in the future. And I get to disappear with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. You're asking us to let you profit from your crimes? Agent Martinez said. I'm asking you to be practical, Marcus replied. I've already profited from my crimes. The question is whether you want to recover some of the money and gain valuable intelligence about financial fraud, or whether you want to spend years in court recovering nothing while I enjoy my retirement in a non-extradition country. Agent Martinez knew that Marcus was right about the practical realities of international financial crime. The FBI had spent years trying to recover money from sophisticated fraudsters, often with limited success. The complexity of modern financial systems and the ease of moving money across international borders made it extremely difficult to recover stolen assets. There's something else you should consider, Marcus added. My operation has actually helped NexTech in several ways. The shell companies I created have provided real services to the company. The money I moved around has improved their cash flow management. And the financial controls I implemented to hide my crimes have actually made their accounting systems more secure. Marcus pulled out financial analyses showing that NexTech's stock price had increased partly due to the improved financial metrics that resulted from his careful manipulation of their accounting systems. In a very real sense, Marcus said, I've made NexTech more valuable than it was before I started stealing from them. The $22 million I'm offering to return, plus the value I've added to the company, means that NexTech will actually be better off financially than if I had never worked there. Agent Martinez realized that she was dealing with someone who had thought through every angle of his crimes and their consequences. Marcus hadn't just stolen money, he had created a situation where prosecuting him would be more expensive and less effective than accepting his deal. I need to discuss this with my supervisors, Agent Martinez said. Of course, Marcus replied, but I should mention that this offer expires in 72 hours. After that, I'll be exercising my right to remain silent, and you'll be dealing with my attorneys. Over the next 3 days, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and NexTech's executives engaged in intense discussions about Marcus's proposal. The legal and practical challenges of prosecuting him were enormous. His assets were scattered across multiple jurisdictions, protected by complex legal structures that would take years to penetrate. The cost of investigation and prosecution would likely exceed the amount of money that could be recovered. Meanwhile, Marcus's offer would immediately return $22 million to NexTech, provide the FBI with detailed intelligence about sophisticated financial fraud techniques, and close the case without the uncertainty and expense of a lengthy legal battle. It's extortion, one prosecutor argued. We can't let criminals dictate the terms of their own punishment. It's pragmatism, another replied. We have a choice between recovering $22 million now or spending years recovering nothing. In the end, the decision came down to simple mathematics. The government's cost-benefit analysis showed that accepting Marcus's deal would result in better outcomes for all parties involved than pursuing traditional prosecution. On Friday afternoon, exactly 72 hours after Marcus had made his offer, Agent Martinez called him with the government's decision. We accept your terms, she said. $22 million returned to NexTech, full cooperation with our investigation, and immunity from prosecution in exchange for your confession and intelligence about your methods. Excellent, Marcus replied. The money transfer will be completed within 24 hours, and I'll provide you with complete documentation of my operation. True to his word, Marcus returned $22 million to NexTech and provided the FBI with a detailed confession that included step-by-step descriptions of his methods, copies of all relevant documents, and recommendations for preventing similar crimes. He also revealed his true identity as Marcus Kowalski and explained how he had created the Marcus Chen persona specifically to infiltrate NexTech. I want you to understand, Marcus told Agent Martinez during his final interview, that I don't consider myself a criminal. I consider myself someone who found a way to redistribute wealth from a system that's fundamentally unfair. Next, executives make millions of dollars while their employees struggle to pay rent in Silicon Valley. I simply found a way to level the playing field. A week later, Marcus Chen disappeared forever. His apartment was cleaned out, his car was found abandoned at San Francisco International Airport, and all traces of his existence vanished. The FBI suspected he had fled to a non-extradition country, but they had no way to prove it and no legal authority to pursue him. 6 months later, a man named Michael Sullivan purchased a small vineyard in New Zealand, using funds that had been carefully laundered through a series of legitimate business transactions. Michael Sullivan had impeccable references, substantial financial resources, and no criminal history whatsoever. He also bore a striking resemblance to Marcus Chen, though no one in New Zealand had any reason to make that connection. Marcus had successfully executed one of the most sophisticated financial frauds in history, stolen $50 million, fooled the FBI into helping him cover his tracks, and negotiated his own immunity from prosecution. He had turned the government's own sting operation into part of his money laundering scheme and had convinced federal prosecutors that letting him keep $25 million was better than trying to recover the full amount through traditional law enforcement. As he watched the sunset over his vineyard, Marcus reflected on the lessons he had learned from his father's experience in Detroit. The system was indeed rigged in favor of the wealthy and powerful, but sometimes, if you were smart enough and patient enough, you could rig it in your favor instead. The perfect crime wasn't just about stealing money without getting caught. It was about stealing money and then convincing the authorities that letting you keep it was the best possible outcome for everyone involved. Marcus had achieved something that few criminals ever manage. He had made his victims grateful for the privilege of being robbed. The end. Disclaimer: this story is completely fictional and created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, companies, or events is purely coincidental. The methods described should never be attempted in real life.